Hello, it is now time for Gut Check Project COVID Files number 9. I'm here with the main host, Dr. Kenneth Brown. I'm Eric Rieger. Dr. Brown, what's happening today?
Not a whole lot, except a ton of information that we have to get through today because we're going to talk about some cool stuff. It is COVID episode number 9. I'm really having a hard time because it looks like you told me that you were doing some renovations at your house.
Yeah,
I did not think that you would actually renovate your office to look like your anesthesia office.
it's weird.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's weird you bring that up. I just kind of don't want to ever leave work, so I just went ahead and built a room that looks like a little GI suite, so that we can just play GI at home. And then, of course, I've got a little monitor right over here.
Are you hooked up right there? Does that show a 98? Oh, so this is almost like if I get you excited, we can watch your pulse rise.
Pulse will be the top number. It looks like it says 76 right now. I'm just really excited to be on camera. So it's
You know what? I'm going to go ahead and put you on the spot right here because I've been watching. You remember we did that episode on masks. We talked about masks and, the Wells evaporation curve and everything. And you happen to be in an area right there. You got a pulse oximeter on you at your renovated home. I like how you put wall oxygen right there. And maybe you've got, just in case you need to, put Marie to sleep, you can do some anesthesia right there. That's awesome. I think everybody should have some sort of anesthetic room in their home just in case there's an emergency. I've seen a whole lot of these Instagram people where they keep putting on masks and they want to see if their pulse ox goes down. I'm challenging you right now. I want you to just start slapping on masks while there's one, but I want to see like 20.
Well, I'll see if I can get to 20. But,
but you know what? Your see, you're ruining my point. Your oxygenation dropped to 95 there for a second. So, anyways, everything good with your family? You can take the mask off. The point is,
thank goodness.
Yeah, you're good.
Struggle. Anyway, yes, everything is great with the family. Oldest son takes off, moves in to his dormitory this week at Texas Tech. He's really excited to have graduated. Youngest son is getting ready for his first season on varsity basketball. So it's a lot of excitement around the house at the moment. What about you?
That's awesome. Something exciting. So everybody's going back to college here. Lucas was hitting with a few people. Somebody that he's was hitting with, it plays for Texas Tech, actually. And he's from Argentina. And you know that we've got a tied Argentina with Atrantil.
Definitely.
And he gave Lucas what's called a bombilla, which is a traditional Argentinian drink that they put tea in, but it is wrapped in Texas Tech coloring. So I've got a Texas Tech bombilla. I sent it to my mom, or I showed her a picture of it, and she was pretty impressed with that. So shout out to Franco, who plays for the Texas Tech tennis team, and your son's going to Texas Tech. That's awesome. So exciting times for everybody, and kids are doing great. I'm sorry,
Absolutely.
you froze there for a second there. You went here, and I didn't know if you were going, I'm a loser, because you froze.
No, I froze it on purpose. No, I was kidding. It's the mask. The mask did it. There was nothing I could do.
The mask did it. So that was like guns up. All right. So today's episode, I want to get through a whole lot. I've been having a kind of intrigued by some of Joe Rogan's recent guests. And Joe Rogan, it's funny because almost on every single episode, he says, why isn't anyone talking about prevention for COVID-19? Right. And I'm like, yo, Joe, we did this back in March. COVID episode number 1, we talked about how the virus replicated and all this stuff. And then COVID 2, we went through all that data. We talked about prevention. And we did it all the way back in March. I'm just saying, I listened to your podcast, Joe. Maybe the least you can do is listen to mine. And then you would have to realize that we do have some, we're actually talking prevention. I'm a healthcare provider talking prevention.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about this. Maybe, when he moves to Austin, we could send a shout out to Mikhail Abdullah of Aces Jiu-Jitsu, have him pay a visit to Joe, roll with him, and convince him to be a podcast guest. He could even join you in the anesthesia room. That'll be something new for him.
Yeah, it would be different. It would be odd. It'd be a weird waiting room scene to have Joe and Mikhail both come through, not to have a procedure, but simply just to wrestle. So
Well, the bottom line is he keeps saying, why isn't anybody talking prevention? We talked prevention in March. And so I want to talk prevention again here, but we're going to talk about it in a way that other people have not talked about it.
Let's do that. I think it's really,
And
really important.
yeah, and so this is a way that very, very few people have actually gotten into this. And I think it's important that the recap from 6 months ago, when this first launched, you and I did a lot of research. We looked at a lot of different things. We found all these preprints. But now what we've seen in that 6 months is that a lot of those concepts that we had that were theories are now full on studies. And now they're full on protocols. And that's the issue with this COVID-19 pandemic, is that it moves very quick. And this is another step in the movement. And I hope that what we're going to talk about today is that the NRF2 pathway, spoiler alert, if you don't know what it is, you better listen to the rest of this episode, because this is pretty interesting. The NRF2 pathway plays a role, and there's been thousands and thousands of articles on the NRF2 pathway in different health aspects, but finally we're seeing some stuff where people are starting to tie it together to COVID-19. So 6 months ago, we were talking about a lot of different things, and now we'll be able to talk about something which a lot of people have not talked about yet. So just to recap, as I always do with you, I put you on the spot. So let's do a quiz. This is the Eric Rieger quiz about our first COVID episodes.
Okay.
So this is a true or false. We discussed how the virus was transmitted and it binds to the SPADE receptor. True or false?
SPADE receptor is false.
What does it bind to?
ACE2 receptor is most commonly recognized as the receptor that it binds to, with a spike protein, by the way.
Correct. And the ACE2 receptor is located primarily in the big toe. True or false?
Primarily, no. I would say primarily not there at all. Mostly in the parenchyma of several different organs, or the
two really important ones.
Yeah,
my favorite and your favorite.
Lungs and GI tract.
Lungs and GI tract, correct. So when we were doing this back then, there was so much confusion, and FDA attorneys were saying, if you even talk about COVID, you better be prepared. So we were even a little scared to bring up this really novel science that was out there. And finally, we realized we can talk science. That's what we're going to do again today. So this is not a discussion of how to prevent. This is not a discussion of how to cure. In fact, here's the disclaimer. I'm a doctor, you're a healthcare provider, but we are not your healthcare providers. So if you have any issues that you actually need to be taken care of, do not listen to this podcast and use that as your health device. Call your doctor. We are not here to diagnose, treat. If you do have a weird rash or a weird lump, please go see your doctor and stop listening to this podcast. Or unless you can wait, then finish listening to it, because maybe you
can wait.
All right. So let's talk about a couple of things just to recap, because in episode 2, we talked about preventative measures, which is kind of exciting. So one of the things we talked about was melatonin, and it was early on. And I was describing melatonin because it actually helps mitigate the inflammasome known as the NLRP3. And we got a little sciencey about it, but that was to prevent the cytokine storm. And right now there's an ongoing trial of randomizing healthcare workers to receive melatonin or not melatonin to see if it will actually help those healthcare workers that to prevent them, or if they were to get COVID, to help out. So our theory is now a study that's going on. The second thing that we talked about was vitamin D. And I just saw a recent study, even Rhonda Patrick talked about this, that vitamin D, if you look at the people in the ICU, over 80% of them are showing to be vitamin D deficient.
Right.
Has to be tied together. So we talked about melatonin and vitamin D. Then we also discussed the role of vitamin C. And then we found out that the Chinese started using IV vitamin C. So when we talked about it before, it was based off of the logical science, and now it's becoming part of protocols. Then N-acetylcysteine and its role with glutathione, very commonplace. People know that. And the thought was that possibly that could help mitigate. I just found 2 trials which are underway, phase 2, looking at how N-acetylcysteine can help treat COVID-19. And then our favorite our favorite drug, Plaquenil, as a zinc ionophore, meaning that it drives zinc in. This thing's come full circle. It went the greatest treatment ever to, oh my gosh, it's going to kill people. And then they went, oh my gosh, those studies were wrong. Now we're right back to it should probably help. We know that it works as a zinc ionophore. We know that there's other ways to do that. So those are the simple things we talked about. And then we also talked about our favorite molecule, polyphenols. So quiz number 2, do you remember how these polyphenols can actually help prevent and treat COVID? 5-step process.
5-step. Wow. If I remember correctly, we're going to block a protease,
Correct.
which is critically important. Polyphenols actually can double as a zinc ionophore, allowing the cell to uptake zinc itself.
Which blocks replication. Excellent.
Blocks replication. Polyphenols themselves can block replication from within the cell. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the very first step is that on contact, it was shown to kill the virus.
Oh, correct. Yes.
Yeah.
I guess it's not a side, but definitely stops the virus actually before it ever is taken up. And I may be reaching on this last one, but I believe that it had something to do with the prevention of furthering inflammation, but I could be wrong on that.
Excellent. You're absolutely right. That's 6 months ago. We have not readdressed this, and people say that doctors and CRNAs that go into anesthesia are not that bright. You're brilliant. You're so smart. It also has been shown to help with secondary bacterial infections. So 5-step. So we went through this 5-step process back then in detail. In fact, I put a Prezi video together on the Atrantil website that we'll put a link to that people can see exactly what we're talking about with references. And so we showed that saponins like horse chestnut and quebracho can be very beneficial in COVID-19. So much so that I just received through our good friend Angie Cook. She just sent me a bunch of articles. This is now one of the more exciting areas that researchers are looking into, polyphenols in its role against COVID-19. Right. So the researchers around the world are looking into this. I just received a 61-page review on this, that everything that we talked about is totally being proven true. And we just found out that there's a study that was approved by the Ministry of Health in South America looking at COVID-19 positive people, randomized trial with large stable polyphenols, quebracho, and chestnut. Okay. So now we're finally seeing some human studies. So all the stuff that we talked about before that we were so worried about, oh, we better not step on any toes or be super careful about this, because we knew that the science made sense. We were so confident about that we launched our frontline program.
Right.
So KBS Research, Atrantil. So talk about the frontline program really quick, and then we'll jump into what I really want to talk about.
Yeah, so the frontline project, really, I mean, we call it a program, but it was really a project. Can we just find out how well polyphenols will work on healthcare workers who essentially at that time were just jumping all in, both feet first, not really knowing the virulence, the safety, how would they fare if they happen to get sick from COVID? I mean, this is very, very early stage and not really all that long ago, just a few months ago, but we ended up supplying several health.
So by several, hospitals. Yeah, so by several, so you cut out there for a second. So by several healthcare workers, it's 100. We were able to supply 100 healthcare workers because we knew that we had that episode where we thought, hey, maybe this might help with this. But we also knew that without a healthy gut, you don't have a healthy immune system. So at the very least, let's protect your gut.
100%. And then the coolest thing, and I don't know if you wanted to go this far, is that now we're starting to get long-term feedback. And by long-term, we mean at least 2 months cycle of people who have continued to be kind of in that danger zone of having those patients who've had COVID. But where other healthcare workers have come down with an infection, we've got several who just simply haven't. And are we onto something? I don't know, but it's all natural and it's not hurting them. And we're getting great feedback from that realm as well.
Exactly. And so that is the exciting thing, that at least it's sort of vindicated that we took the time to look at this preliminary data 6 months ago. And now I'm seeing all these ideas that we have. Other scientists have ran with it. They've done studies. We are at least being proactive, also saying, let's at least protect your gut, because we know those ACE2 receptors are in your intestines, and that's a portal of entry. One thing we did not get a chance to talk about 6 months ago was, we ran out of time, was to talk about how the NRF2 pathway relates to COVID.
Yep.
So you know that I've been a huge fan of reading about the NRF2 pathway from great scientists. Rhonda Patrick is a huge spokesperson, and she does an amazing job, great interviewer. Dr. Jed Fahey at Johns Hopkins has spearheaded a ton of this research. And John Gilday with Brock Elite, and he's so smart, and they've designed studies around this that it's just amazing. There's been thousands and thousands of articles about the NRF2 pathway and its effect on health. And this is the first one that I've come across where it just took it head on. And it said, what about the NRF2 pathway in COVID-19? And that's what I want to talk about here, because before we talked about all these other things, now let's talk about how this particular pathway plays a role with COVID-19.
Let's do it. I think that's fantastic. And it just so, I mean, I like that you called out broccoli and sulforaphane, because that's really what brought NRF2 pathway back to us before COVID even kind of hit the scene. It's awesome.
And we're going to talk just about NRF2, and then we're going to get into how to focus on how to improve your NRF2 pathway. All right, so everybody's like, what is NRF2? Well, duh. It's really, I mean, it makes sense. It says NRF2. That clearly means nuclear factor erythroid derived 2 related factor 2.
Absolutely.
Totally, right? NRF2. So nuclear factor erythroid derived related factor 2. This makes absolutely no sense. I mean, this breaks every rule of acronym making completely. I mean, it was discovered in 1992. And I'm like, come on, don't you people know how to do acronyms back in 1992? I'm like, why in the world? How does one letter get like 5 words? And then they're just like, hey, I mean, it's like, hey, Bob, what do you want to name this new thing that you discovered? He's like, I want to call it nuclear factor erythroid derived 2 related factor. And they're like, that's too long. That'll be NFED2RF2. He's like, well, just NRF2. It's like, no, you can't do that. That violates all acronyms. It's probably why most people don't know about this pathway, just because it's the acronym black hole, the acronym abyss.
It doesn't match up to anything.
It doesn't. It doesn't. It would be like if Eric spelled something that was like 4 paragraphs long, and the first letter just was like this big description about your personality.
It reminds me of the periodic table, where lots of times the letters don't match up to what the word is at all.
Yes.
K, etc. Anyway.
So the bottom line, outside of being a really bad acronym, the NRF2 pathway is let's talk about it. And I want to do it. I need to put it into a nutshell. And by a nutshell, I mean a giant ass coconut, because it does so much with our body. So in a big giant coconut, NRF2 regulates 250 genes that produce a bunch of enzymes involved in cellular health.
Correct.
So basically, we're talking about a pathway that turns on other genes, and those genes do a bunch of different things. So, for instance, its main job is to detoxify cells. So by detoxifying cells, toxins come in, and then the NRF2 pathway gets rid of these toxins before they can destroy cells. Another really important thing that it does is it enhances our innate immune system. What the innate immune system is your body's first recognition that something's going on. So it enhances your body's ability to go, that's a virus, that's bacteria. No, you need to get out of here. The innate immune system is your first line of defense. And we talk about immunity all the time. Then the NRF2 induces antioxidant genes. It is an antioxidant way to get rid of things. Reactive oxygen species. As I'm talking and I'm burning energy here, my mitochondria are burning ATP. They're producing reactive oxygen species. If I produce too much of that and don't get rid of it, that basically is what causes damage, which ultimately is what causes the cell to age, causes the cell to die, makes it vulnerable. In other words, reactive oxygen species make us age on a cellular level. And so that's what ends up happening. That's how come you get exposed to too much UV light and different things like this. Over time, your skin has a tough time with it. When you have these reactive oxygen species that build up over time, we end up with disease and chronic inflammation. So you can see that this pathway is super important for cellular health. And as we get into this, you'll see that on a cell-to-cell basis, that is how we handle the world. You don't handle it as a whole. You handle it on a one-to-one cell. And if your NRF2 pathway is working, you can take on the world. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. It's the upkeep. It's what keeps the cell safe. It's basically the janitor, the maintenance, everything. Paying the
Yeah.
bill for having your NRF2 working.
So your NRF2, so if somebody's going, well, I don't really think that much on a cellular level. Well, okay, let's think about this for a moment. What I'm talking about is inflammation on a cellular level. So right now, there's very robust studies looking at how to improve the NRF2 pathway in issues like brain inflammation, and that includes from traumatic brain injury all the way through Alzheimer's, all the way through dementia, looking at cancer prevention. Autism is huge right now because they realize so many different things actually lead to autism spectrum disorder. Environmental pollutions. So you may survive COVID and now all of us rebound and factories start shooting up and now you've got benzene in the air and you're going to end up dying of a bladder cancer because the factories that are sitting next to you. That's super important. The NRF2 pathway helps with that. It's anti-aging. I just explained how oxygen species make ourselves grow old, dementia, and recent study that I found, it actually gets rid of H. pylori, which is in my field because H. pylori causes ulcers in the stomach. So
Yeah.
I've anecdotally, I've had a couple patients where I have tweaked their NRF2 using various products, which we will get into. And people that have failed 3 rounds of antibiotics, actually, H. pylori went away or it brought it down to the level where it was undetected. So anecdotally, I've got some evidence of that. That's why I kind of threw that in there. Some people are like, how does H. pylori even compare to dementia and aging? I'm like, it does in my world. All right.
Yeah.
It does in my world.
Yeah.
So you're giving me this look, and I know that if you still had the pulse ox right now, your pulse would be going up because you're just like, you idiot, what are we doing this podcast? You're talking about all this other stuff. How in the world, don't you realize that we're in the middle of an epidemic? I'm like, yes, I do realize that. So we're going to get away from dementia, aging, and H. pylori and talk about the elephant in the room, which is the pandemic that we're in right now.
Okay, let's do that.
All right. So that is why we're going to talk about this really interesting article, because it may be possible, theoretically, that by improving your NRF2 pathway, it may prevent you from getting SARS-CoV-2 leading to COVID-19. If those SARS-CoV-2 to COVID-19 doesn't make sense to you, watch COVID episode number 1. That's where we went into definitions and looked at everything.
Right.
And if you do get it, then the severity of it will not be as much. And so key points to dust off. This is quiz number 3 for Eric. You are now in quiz number 3.
I'm ready.
All right. So you fill in the blank. All right. SARS-CoV-2 is very blank. Contagious or not contagious?
I believe it's contagious.
Correct.
There's
It attaches.
multiple choice. I'm just going to highlight that. There was more multiple choice. I just want to highlight that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of standardized tests, so I just I prefer multiple choice over anything, over essay writing. All right, fine. It attaches to some cell. What's that cell called? On the spike protein.
I'm sorry, on the spike protein?
Yeah.
What's the cell called?
You already said it earlier. Yeah.
Yes.
ACE2.
ACE2.
Yeah. All right. So some people get really sick due to a lot of inflammation, called a storm. Some blank storm. Cytokine storm. And older people, obese people, and those with high blood pressure seem to do much better. True or false?
That is unfortunately false.
Padow. COVID-19 summed up right there in a four question. That's pretty much, it's very infectious. If you have comorbid conditions, you stand a chance to have much worse disease. And we do know that a cytokine storm can take out very healthy people also.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, that's what we're talking about here. So now let's talk about how virus relates to our cells. And ultimately, I'm going to show how we're going to circle back, and maybe we're looking at how to treat this in a slightly different, a slightly wrong way. Maybe we
Okay.
need to start thinking about how to improve different systems. All right, so viruses, including SARS-CoV-2, and this goes across all viruses, what they are going to try and do is they're going to try and decrease the NRF2 pathway or the NRF2 activity because it makes our cells more vulnerable to attack. So when we get invaded by a virus, it actually tries to downregulate the NRF2. And if it can do that, then it can get into a cell, it can replicate, and then the virus spreads, and then the virus hits other cells. And as they do this, it continues to suppress the NRF2 pathway, because I'll explain a little bit later how the NRF2 pathway blocks the virus from coming in.
Right.
So it actually can prevent that. The virus knows this. And now we're starting to see that it says one of the things it needs to do is to suppress that. So it's like a security system that it's trying to get rid of. So a good idea would be to, once the virus gets in and infects one cell, it can turn down the NRF2 activity, and then it can hop over and affect the next cell.
It's like cutting the phone lines before you break into a bank. You know,
That's you did that once, and you got away with it. I don't think you should say it out loud all the time. But,
you
it
think
is
about all
exactly
this
like that.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's basically hijacking one cell, then you use that cell to turn off the NRF2 pathway down the line. Meaning it'd be a pretty good idea to keep your cells healthy by increasing your NRF2. Protect when the NRF2 is up high, that can actually help with that. And we do know that there's different ways NRF2 can block SARS-CoV-2. So in other words, we can prevent ourselves from getting COVID-19. And we talked about a few of the things early on. So what's really interesting is that the NRF2 pathway has a bunch of built-in mechanisms to prevent viruses from coming in.
Right.
So when Joe Rogan's over there talking about, why doesn't anybody talk about prevention? We need to do this. Let's talk about remdesivir. Let's talk about that. I'm saying if you've got a healthy immune system, I'm saying if you've got a robust way to help your body has natural defenses against these different things. The NRF2 pathway has antiviral mechanisms. It can prevent the virus from attaching, and it actually has built-in things to stop the viral replication. And it can decrease the amount of inflammation, so the cytokine storm. And not just my opinion, and not just in theory. I did find an article where it looked at 40 people with COVID-19, and what they did is they did lung biopsies on them, and they were actually able to show that there was a direct link to the severity and an inverse relationship to the NRF2 level. I'll say it again. The people that did really bad, this particular group of scientists said, let's look to see if their NRF2 activity is up. The ones that had high viral loads and lots of lung damage, NRF2 was way down.
Correct.
And then they were able to sit there and show something opposite. In young, healthy people that got infected with COVID-19, they were able to show that there was a robust activation of NRF2. In other words, an attack happened and the body upregulated this system to say, not today. We're going to sit there. And they show that these host cells were able to control the amount of replication, the amount of spread, and mitigate the amount of inflammation. So in old people or people with comorbid disease, in the quiz that you just passed, by the way, I think you're sitting at like a 99% on the 3 quizzes I did. So
I'm so excited.
well, there's a lot of people homeschooling. This is almost like this is like homeschooling right now. You're taking your quizzes online.
Yeah.
In old people or people with comorbid conditions, the NRF2 activation may be insufficient to stop this.
Right.
So these are just some examples of, okay, we've got theory, and now scientists are starting to look at this, and they're doing biopsies, and they're looking and going, oh my gosh, wait a minute, this is a little bit low. So the viral interplay, the viral interplay with NRF2. Think of it this way: when a cell is attacked by a virus, so a cell attacks, this causes oxidative stress. So the cell's like, no, quit trying to work your way in. It sends a signal to the NRF2 pathway. So somebody cuts a line at the bank. We're going to keep using your bank analogy here, which is probably how you afforded to convert your office into an anesthesia suite.
But they cheap, man.
Yeah. So bank line gets cut, alarm gets sent. They turn around and say, we got something going on here. We better make sure that our NRF2 pathway is ready for this. The NRF2 pathway kicks in. This stimulates a series of genes. So when we think about what genes do, genes produce proteins. That's
Correct.
the beauty of a system. So you have this one NRF2 pathway that goes, gene A, I need you to produce this protein. Gene B, I need you to produce this protein, and so on, which is why it can do so many things. And so what its first job is it stimulates a series of genes responsible to both protect and immediately start to detoxify the cell. So when the virus is trying to mess with the cell, it creates damage. That damage is what the virus is trying to do, because once it starts having a oxidative stress, then that oxidative stress weakens the cell and it gets tired, and then the virus can come in. This actually immediately starts to protect on the inside. It detoxifies it, so it theoretically prevents the virus from getting in. So once it gets turned on and it immediately protects the cell that's being attacked, then the other virus are trying to attach to cells. The NRF2 pathway calls down the line and goes, we've got invaders. Turn on the gene that will prevent the invaders from even attaching. So cell number one sneaks through, attaches, starts messing with this cell. This cell tells the NRF2 pathway. NRF2 pathway says, mobilize everybody. Let's not let any other viruses attach. So then what it does is it actually turns on this really cool gene that is a protease inhibitor. Not just a protease inhibitor. So if you've been following the news, that's what everybody's been talking about. That's what remdesivir is a protease inhibitor. Well, this actually blocks a particular aspect of it called the TMPRSS2 protease inhibitor, because we have talked protease inhibitors with polyphenols.
Correct.
So it's a different aspect of it. And so when the virus has to bind to the ACE2, there's a docking protein called a protease. And if it hits and then it connects the two, this prevents that from happening or making it more difficult. That's the second thing. Then, this is so cool. Not only is it protecting the cell, detoxifying it, not only is it saying we cannot allow more viruses to attach, then it sends another signal to a different gene and says downregulate ACE2 receptors immediately on all vulnerable cells. They showed that it actually downregulates ACE2. You
Right.
said earlier in your quiz that that's what the virus is looking for, is ACE2 receptors.
Right.
So it saves the cell, it prevents more cells from attacking, and says, let's give them fewer targets, decrease the ACE2 receptor, and by by raising the NRF2 pathway, ACE2 receptors go down, and vice versa. When the NRF2 pathway goes down, ACE2 receptors are more highly expressed. So keep that in mind. And then finally, another gene gets turned on, and it lowers something called NF kappa B. NF kappa B is I'm going to say this wrong, but basically, let's call it the cytokine. Let's call it a cytokine that starts the inflammatory process. NF kappa B turns on the inflammatory cascade, where then you'll hear things like interleukin 6, TNF alpha, these different things. So What it does is it actually lowers NF kappa B. It turns on another gene to prevent the virus from saying, I'm going to mobilize my own inflammatory response. We go, no. Does that make, you're giving me a look? That doesn't make sense.
No, no, that makes sense. I was unaware of that being the initial. I'm learning.
So the virus attaches,
Unaware
the
of that every
virus,
time. So
yeah, the virus attaches, the virus invades. And one of the tricks it does is it wakes up NF kappa B. It goes, hey, 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 wake up. NF kappa B doesn't, its job is to fight, its job is to create a cytokine storm in
nice,
the appropriate setting. That's its job. So it doesn't argue who wakes him up
right?
or her. It's, it pokes NF kappa B. NF kappa B just kind of wakes up and goes, all right, let's go interleukin 6, let's go TNF alpha, let's go interleukin 12, 23, let's go. We got something going on. And the virus is in the cell just like giggling, going, the NRF2 pathway understands that and says, nope, go back to bed, NF kappa B. And this has all been shown in these very brilliant studies about how they can actually look at this. And when I started reading more and more about it, like I've always been very interested in the NRF2 pathway for anti-aging, for recovery, for detoxification. And then I'm coming across all this stuff about, oh my gosh, this thing is amazing for viruses. So it's a pathway. We all have it. You have it. I have it. We all have, if you're listening, you have an NRF2 pathway. And we're going to, get into how to actually improve that. All right. So I asked you earlier about how people that are older, obese,
Mm-hmm.
hypertensive, diabetic tend to have worse outcomes. And I've seen a bunch of literature out there about how the theories are, well, they've got comorbid things, they've got increased ACE2 receptors, yes, and yes, and yes. I'm going to just pivot a little bit and let's talk about something else. So remember that what SARS-CoV-2 does, if there's an ACE2 receptor within reach, it binds and it'll bind to wherever that ACE2 receptor is. If you get a
Okay.
big viral load, it can do it in the lung, it can do it in the liver, it can do it in the intestines. And if you have a lot of viruses and lots of ACE2 receptors, then it can actually bind there. So if the NRF2 pathway is not healthy, then you have lots of ACE2 receptors, lots of viral binding immediately, which leads to way too much inflammation, which overwhelms the NRF2 pathway. And then it can't do all these other things that I'm talking about. So it's basically, I kind of think of it like this. Once a cell gets in, so imagine a high school, parents go out of town, a high school beer party or something. So somebody wants to have a couple friends over, word gets out, there's a party, a couple people come in through the front door and they're just like, hey, Eric, heard your parents are out of town. You're like, no, I'm kind of just a couple of close friends, whatever. They're like, man, it's cool. Yeah, I just got a couple cousins with me. That's all good. They come in and then a couple of them go to the back door and they open up the back door and then they let more of their friends in. Suddenly you've got a whole house full of people. You don't know hardly any of them, but you've got entry points that are coming in. So basically, once a virus gets in, shuts down the NRF2 pathway, then there's more entry points in the cells around there. So the idea is that all they got to do is get in. So if you don't have a healthy NRF2 pathway, it can be easily overwhelmed. So once the cell gets in, it can replicate quicker because your NRF2 pathway is not shutting it down. And this leads to hijacking cells. They die, causes more inflammation, causes more reactive oxygen species, ties up the NRF2 pathway more. And now it's a domino effect where every single cell is more vulnerable to attack, which is why drugs like remdesivir and things like that probably help out a little bit because it gives a little boost where they try and block those protease things. And there are actually studies now showing that they can pharmacologically induce the NRF2 pathway in animal models. They were actually showed that if you can induce the NRF2 pathway, you will inhibit COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2 replication, and you'll keep the cytokines under control.
That's huge news. And
It's
I don't want to
nuts, isn't
spoil
it?
it here, but that's awesome.
I just thought it was so fascinating because I feel like 6 months ago, you and I were like really walking on thin ice going, does this make sense? And now I'm like, this makes total sense. And this will be a new level of how we're going to protect ourselves.
Hey,
So,
just before I forget, I just want to say that you're addressing COVID. You're addressing the current coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, all of the different words that it goes by. But really, what you're describing is how your body works for you every single day. So everything that you're outlining here, it's working great in this pandemic because this is how your body was engineered to protect you. And so just because we're in pandemic doesn't mean that this is stuff that we need to pay attention to today. It didn't, NRF2 pathway didn't just pop up because of the pandemic, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
oh, totally. The NRF2 pathway is something that was once again discovered in 1992. There were some Japanese researchers. They teamed up with some researchers in Johns Hopkins, and the science is just absolutely brilliant. It's just
Sure.
beautiful. It just now it's somebody. I got the article. I should probably give props to the author. The team of people that put this together said, "Hey, we've been studying the NRF2 pathway, and now we've teamed up with some virologists. How are we not putting this together?"
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing here on this one. We'll
Oh
talk
yeah,
about
no, it's
this.
brilliant. I just don't want, I want the audience to know that where you're going to guide them here in a moment about NRF2 pathway and what they can do for themselves is good all of the time, coronavirus or not, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Totally. So this is where it comes down to. So now the question is, we've got all these people that are basically, this like nothing in history. There's been this divide. There's been this really um, dichotomy of, is this really serious? Is this not? We've got certain countries that lock down. We've got other countries trying to do this. Well, the one thing that we do know is that even if you believe you're not at risk, what you can do is you can carry it to somebody who is at risk, which is
Yeah.
an older person, an obese person, and so on. So I just want to talk a little bit about why possibly older people, obese people, and people with other issues may end up having a more severe outcome. And if you look at this, let's talk about aging, for instance,
Okay.
which I got to say this, your NRF2 pathway is just kicking ass because you actually look a lot younger now than you did a couple of years ago. Maybe it's the
Yeah.
shaggy hair. Maybe it's the COVID hair. I don't know. But
It could be all that kind of stuff. I think for 78, I look pretty good. I
yeah, yeah. For 78, you're not bad. So
don't know.
the reason why, and so here's something to think about. Aging, by definition, really is low grade inflammation on a cellular level happening at all times. If we did
Right.
not have reactive oxygen species, then the cells would not, it's called senescence, where the cells age. And as the cells age, and if they die and you don't have cleaner people coming in, we age. This is how we end up growing older. It's low level inflammatory process. So interestingly, the more inflammation we have on a cellular level, it inversely affects our NRF2. So
Mm.
as you age, by definition, your NRF2 goes down, just as a fact of life. So as the NRF2 goes down, our cells age, we tend to lose more and more NRF2. And the NRF2, if you want to know how it prevents this, actually regulates something called the superoxide dismutase, which is now in classic form. Pharmaceutical industry is trying to figure out how to manipulate the superoxide dismutase so that they can have an anti-aging drug. But the the NRF2 blocks a certain thing. And with less of that, the superoxide dismutase continues to get out of proportion to the point where you really don't have any NRF2 to fight anything, and we can die of old age, so to speak. So with a lower NRF2 pathway, the virus binds easier and replication is easier. That may be one of the reasons why age plays a role. I don't think I've heard anybody, Fauci or anybody, say older people may be affected because their NRF2 level is not perfect.
No, and I'm not saying he doesn't know it, but maybe it's just because it could be the content is so deep and just misunderstood. I would bet a lot of people who are watching and listening today this may be the first time they've heard of NRF2. You know what I mean?
I
So
know, and that's the thing. Now I think back on that. I was making fun of the acronym, but maybe they're smart. They're like, "Whoa, don't make it real long. Just put a couple letters. Nobody will pay attention to the acronym rules. We'll just do it this way." Because
we'll
NRF2 is
never
right
be
at the
able to spit that out. There's no
yeah,
way. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. If you and I start like discovering stuff in the body, we're gonna name it like really simple stuff that people will remember.
Yeah.
So,
Ted, Robert, Lance,
yeah,
you know.
exactly. All right. So let's talk about obese people. So it's been theorized that in the United States, we tend to have a higher percentage of people that fit into the obese category, which may be why we are tending to have sicker people. That's one of the theories. So obesity. In a 2017 study, researchers actually described that oxidative stress on a cellular level is the main cause of obesity.
Okay.
So think about that. On a cellular level, oxidative stress is what's making you obese. So you're like, you sure it isn't the McDonald's and the, whatever? Oh, guess what? Eating shitty food is a form of oxidative stress. So as we eat very refined foods, as we do this, it puts a cellular stress. That cellular stress creates these reactive oxygen species, which leads to low-level inflammation, which may mean that triggers certain downfield genes, which prevent you from actually losing some of this weight. So studies have shown that a diet fed to mice, which is the typical American diet, the SAD diet that is high in fat and in refined sugars, that is highly refined, they show that those mice have decreased NRF2 compared to mice that were fed a healthier diet. And those mice that were eating the SAD diet, the American diet, actually became morbidly obese as opposed to the other mice.
Yeah.
First time I've ever linked that together. First time I've ever thought about, hey, every time you stick a super refined food in your body, you're creating inflammation. We always talk about it in the gut. I talk about it with tight junctions. We talk about it with SIBO. We talk about it with inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel. And then it never occurred to me that when these things get in the cell, when you have, don't even get me started. Some of the coolest research on the NRF2 pathway is with glyphosate. So when you take in a lot of glyphosate wrecks shop on a cellular level, creating inflammation, which leads to this. Coming back to that same thing, that cellular detoxification, if you don't have it. So, in fact, I dug a little deeper, and it shows that when NRF2 is activated, it actually decreases the formation of fat. In other words, it turns a gene on that prevents adipogenesis. Genesis is the formation of, adipose, a Latin form of fat. It prevents fat formation.
Wow. I'd never heard that before.
I know, it's so crazy. And the NRF2 pathway actually improves insulin sensitivity. Once again, when you become diabetic, when you have obesity and the oxidative stress goes up, it continually lowers your NRF2 pathway. Your NRF2 pathway gets wore out. It's there to help you. And if you continually try and say, let's see how good you are, and you don't feed your NRF2 pathway, you don't take care of your NRF2 pathway, then it's not. I mean, you just spent all this money on this gorgeous, beautiful guard dog that you just ignored all the time and fed it horrible. You just decided to never do it. When you need that guard dog to step up and do something, it's like, man, I'm kind of fat and lazy. You've kept me here for 70 years doing nothing. I'm not going to get up and do what I was trained to do because it's been way too long. That's a pretty bad analogy, but you got me on the whole bank robbery thing. And now I'm just thinking guarding.
Well, what I'm hearing is just all of the different facets of how a healthy NRF2 pathway is going to help someone throughout their life. It's not just acute when you're younger or anything else like that. We're talking about your entire lifespan, which is something that we cover a lot, on the show and throughout some of the COVID files. So hearing that and now learning about the prevention of maybe even fat formation, which is a little bit different than worrying about infection from a virus. You just said it. How do we take care of our NRF2?
Oh, so exciting. So exciting. So basically, you've already summed this up. The NRF2 pathway is super important. And I'm going to say even more important now that we're in this weird COVID-19 pandemic.
Sure.
It was important before. And so if you do not have a proper NRF2 pathway, you may be at risk of chronic inflammation, which leads to premature aging. You may be at risk of cancer. You are stacking the deck against you for obesity. You have the potential to have increased diabetes with insulin resistance. There was a small study, and it's in preprint, and I don't know how valid this is because it was only it was an N of 4 people, and the authors seemed not stable, but it appears that it'll prevent you from attack by murder hornets. Not sure about that one.
I don't know about that either.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, sometimes you see stuff in the literature and you just have to go, I don't know. I don't know about that. And
I don't think written on a napkin is in literature. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Right. So ultimately, you can also set yourself up for infections. And that's what we're talking about. So the cool part is it's actually really easy to improve your NRF2 system or the NRF2 pathways. And what? Oh. I hate to do this to you, but we have run out of time, Eric. We have actually gone long already. So I can't get into how to protect your NRF2 system just yet. We'll do it next episode and I'll explain it all. Just don't do anything to affect your NRF2 till next episode, where I'm going to tell you how to improve your NRF2 pathway. And it's not that hard. So next episode, we'll talk about it. We got to rambling about your anesthesia and everything. I apologize to the audience. I was intending to tell you all this, but just tune in next episode. Share this one.
Share it. Yeah, NRF2. Never heard about it. This is COVID file number 9. Dr. Brown's on call and he's got to run back to the hospital. There's nothing we can do about it. But we do this for you. This is the end of COVID file number 9. Tune in for COVID file number 10 when he answers really where he's kind of got us all hanging.
Yeah, so. And I think that if any of you know Joe Rogan, just send him a copy of this. Go, Joe, come on. Do this. I mean, we're already covering this, So, I mean, he's had so many. Oh, you know what? I look at that. I look at the people that, like, I've been on their podcasts and, they've been on ours and stuff. And we've had a lot of mutual friends. I mean, come on. I'm going to talk about prevention here. Let's do this.
It's going to work eventually.
Yeah, eventually. So I apologize that we can't get to it. Tune in next week where I'm going to tell you exactly how you can improve your NRF2 system. It is important. So thank you very much for tuning in. Eric, thank you for taking the time to do this. And I love your new CRNA studio there in the house. It looks gorgeous.
We'll see how many times we get to reappear here, but we'll find out.
All right. Right on. All right, everybody. Stay tuned to next week so you can figure out how to improve it.
Definitely. See y'all then.